Thank you for joining us today. This is Bill Baker at Firestorm. We're pleased to be joining you today for a webinar that is co-sponsored by the Rochester Business Alliance. Jim, if you could advance.
I'm working on there, Bill, and I think you've now got it up.
Good. Firestorm, you can follow us, and we invite you to be our friend at Firestorm Solutions on Facebook, or we also have a Twitter account, Firestorm Soul. The hashtag for this section is #CrisisCoach. And we invite you to visit firestorm.com to view our materials that we have there and to become a regular visitor at firestorm.com. This presentation that we're making today is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion. The work product should be discussed in conjunction with your local authorities as well as your organization's personal counsel. The information given should not be viewed as legal advice or legal opinion. The Rochester Business Alliance and Firestorm are presenting this Crisis Coach series. This is the fourth in the series. Today we're discussing why, what, and how do you test. You can watch past webinars and you can register for future webinars at firestorm.com. We're pleased to have today's moderator with us, Chip Dawson of the Rochester Business Alliance. Chip, over to you.
Good morning. Welcome to a new year and the fourth.
Chip, we lost you there, or at least I lost you.
Yeah. Did you?
Yes. Could you?
Have you got me now?
I've got you now. You're perfect.
Okay. Let's try it again. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the new year and the fourth in the series of the Crisis Coach. The Rochester Business Alliance is delighted to partner with Firestorm to bring you, our members, this fascinating and now 45-minute discussion by Jim Satterfield, one of the country's top crisis managers, covering the question of why test plans. We're pleased that you've returned to the series or joined us for the first time. The Rochester Business Alliance is committed to strong, ongoing support for our members as they deal with the issues of running an effective organization. We also recognize that both internal errors and external forces may disrupt your daily routine, and that's where the briefing Jim will provide today will be very valuable. As you listen to Jim, think about the actions you might take to avoid getting into a crisis situation. And when the program's over, contact us to talk about how we might help you with those actions. Now, from possibly sunny Atlanta today, is Jim.
Well, thank you, Chip. I appreciate you doing that. To talk about Firestorm and the weather in Atlanta, we'll try to tie all those together. To talk a little bit about Firestorm, our goal is to transform crisis into value, and it seems that the weather tried to make that a real objective for us this week as we come together. So it's great to have a chance to talk again with the folks in Western New York and to focus around topics that really make a difference as we're looking at these areas. When we think about each year and each one of the webinars that we do, we try to give an update about what's been going on that would be pertinent to the area of business continuity and crisis management and look at the trends that have been occurring. Over the past few weeks and since we last spoke as a group, we've had a great many things occur. The shootings, workplace violence, continues to be a significant risk and exposure for all organizations. We've seen it both in schools and colleges. The shooting at around Christmas with Littleton, Colorado, with the events that occurred there, and then just a week ago in Roswell, New Mexico, and we've had other events around the country. Shooting at Purdue. We had a student in Jefferson County, Colorado, that's where Columbine is located, who drank bleach and poured gasoline on himself and set himself afire in the school cafeteria. So these events are traumatic for everyone involved, and doing the proper behavioral threat assessment to identify if individuals are risks to themselves and others is absolutely critical. So as we think about planning, identifying, have a workplace violence program in place can make a significant difference. We've even seen it move into the mainstream areas with the shooting in Florida at the movie theater and that's a result of an irritation over sending text messages. And the mall in Maryland, in Columbia, Maryland, just outside of D.C., that's occurred. This whole area of violence has to be a key element and integrate fully with your plans within your organization. The winter storm that's been coming through and the repeating patterns have affected every business across the country on a regular basis. We saw that acutely aware in the South with the storms of this week as they came through Alabama and Georgia and then moved through the Carolinas. This was a combination of events that triggered very negative outcomes. We had students who were forced to spend the night on the floor of the school, several thousand in one county alone here in the Atlanta area. We also had many trapped on school buses trying to get home or being dropped at bus stops where parents were not available to pick them up. Businesses and the government closed at exactly the same moment in time as the events were occurring on Tuesday. So you took the normal rush hour traffic that would be spread over 3 or 4 hours and put that number of cars on the road at exactly the same point in time. And then we're surprised that there was congestion and a problem. Add that to freezing rain and sleet, and now you have the ability to take what would have been a disruption, move it to a disaster, and for some, truly a crisis. So planning together and doing exercises to know what should you monitor, what are the particular triggers, testing your plans to make sure the communications and activities are working becomes absolutely critical. And that's the reason why we're doing a webinar today focusing on testing plans and pulling those together. Communicable illness continues to be a particular exposure. We're seeing a resurgence of the swine flu globally and here in the States. And there are several groups that are projecting a pandemic associated with it for later this year. So that's an area to go back and review your communicable illness plan and make sure that you have the policies and procedures and the proper triggers attached to there. There's been a significant reorganization of the WHO levels, the World Health Organization, levels for pandemic and an absence of triggers there. If you have questions, please reach out to us or the association and we can help you clarify that. We've seen the particular impacts around communicable illness with the cruise lines that just has occurred where they had 300 people sick with the norovirus and then they thought they done a cleaning, put back to sea, and then had 600 people sick. So these types of events can certainly impact workforce and the availability of your people to be able to do the jobs that they need to have in place. And lastly, Freedom Industries. That's the company in West Virginia that polluted the water supply that impacted hundreds of thousands of people. As a result of that, schools closed, business closed, families couldn't drink the water, couldn't take a bath, couldn't live their life as they would normally do that. Water is something that we always take for granted. Turn on the faucet, the water is there. It has a significant impact when that's the source of an exposure to everyone. The resulting financial burden here with lost sales and revenues, the bankruptcy of the firm, ultimately this will have a significant economic impact within that area. So your business could be together. You could have your plans in place. The activities of others can have a direct impact on who you are and how you operate your organization. So as you think about the topics that you're seeing in the news, think about how they would impact your organization and what you need to have in place. But we want to shift a little bit today and think about how do you know if you're ready? How do you know if your employees understand what they need to do? The words that are across the screen give you multiple areas of things to think about. And at the very center there, you see the word exercises. And that's really where we want to focus today. What do you do? Where do you go? What do you say? What do you need? All of those become critical elements when we think about our plans. And the only way we know that those plans will work is when we see the success in the event or when we see the understanding level in a test exercise as you carry it through with your employees. So why should we test? And we're going to continually expand these thoughts throughout our conversation today together. And Chip, I encourage you to jump in at any point if you want to clarify. By the way, Chip has expertise in this area, and it's right over the center of his plate. The reason we test plans are to identify weaknesses. Where is something not correct? Where is there a gap? We also do a test to start to stimulate changes within the organization. Sometimes senior leadership needs to see something not work before they want to address the exposure. We also need to then come back and get buy-in across the groups, that item further down the list. You're looking for errors that have been done. You want to provide insights to everyone within the organization. And then the last bullet here, utilize everything that we've been talking about as a lesson learned to update your plan. Now, when you update your plan, that's going to create an entire new cycle of training and awareness that has to be integrated within your organization, and also across the multiple plans that you would have: business continuity, communicable illness, workplace violence, social media risk. All of those, including your emergency plan, your incident response teams, and then ultimately your crisis management plan and crisis management team, and the decisions that they're making. So the benefits are listed here, and they obviously take the bullets from the previous slide and expand them. Practicing helps to assure the response that needs happening. If you think about a football team, and we've got the Super Bowl coming up on Sunday, those teams practice through the year to know what's going to happen in every situation, if it's a run play or a pass play, or if there's someone else that's unexpected doing something. How do they recognize it so that they can move forward predictably on the play that they're attempting to run? It familiarizes everyone with where the vulnerabilities are, where the impacts are, and how they would communicate and how they would make decisions there, and in many cases, how can they mitigate those impacts. We don't sell a button that you can push that can stop the winter storm or the tornado from occurring, but we do have the ability to test plans to mitigate those impacts to come together. Now, it also allows then a better understanding of problems or weaknesses so that we can stimulate the changes together. This has to be a part of the culture within your organization. And then finally, the expanding of where the errors are. And the beauty of having the error in the exercise is no one got hurt. It didn't cost the company any money. It didn't hurt our brand and reputation. When we think about disasters and crises, there are four types that always come to mind. It could be a loss of a facility. It could be the loss of workforce. It could be a loss of information or data, or it could be a direct impact on the brand and reputation, or a combination of those four things. That's the reasons why we're testing the plan. And when we think about plans and crises, everything you learn in the first 24 hours is generally wrong, because you're going to have incomplete information or totally wrong information, and your management team is going to be forced to be making decisions based upon that incorrect information. A crisis is not business as usual. It's business as unusual. And so we want you to then be able to have your team focus on the questions that you see up on the page here. The exercise focuses the participants that go through to figure out what's changed, what's coming on, what is it that we know, not what we think, but what is it that we know, and what are we concerned about, and then what's going to be our plan? How are we going to monitor? What is it that we're monitoring? Because if everything we've learned is wrong, then we need to be aware of when that changes and where we go forward, and then what is the message? The message from the snowstorm in Atlanta is lots of finger pointing that's been going on. And I find it interesting that the mayor's primary message appears to be, well, we're not as bad as we were 3 years ago. We didn't make as many mistakes as we did then. A basic rule in any crisis is if you're explaining, you're losing. So having your messages defined in advance makes a difference. And testing those messages is critical as we look at the exercise as we go forward. So that's a little bit of a framework. As we drill down further, the purpose then is to allow management to use and assess the plans and the teams that are all throughout your organization so that they are there to assess and measure to which your employees understand their role and function. Now, as we look at plans across the country, the failure to train employees for what they need to do at work and at home is the second greatest failure in a disaster or crisis. The fourth greatest failure is the failure to test and update plans. This whole testing program combines both of those, so 2 of the top 5 failures in a disaster or crisis are addressed by your tests and exercises that you run. It also works to enhance communication and coordination between your departments, between your teams, between first responders, between your employees, between the public, your vendors, your suppliers. All of those come together. And we really are focusing on how do we get better, how do we continue to improve, and then how do we respond better at each level along the way. Now, the scope and objective, as we look at it, we don't want to do an exercise that's going to jeopardize normal business operations. All of us have organizations and functions that we have to perform, so we want to keep that in mind as we're thinking about the scope. We want to not start out with an exercise that's so complex that people get confused, it hurts in participation. Start with the basic areas. Test one element or a second, and then add levels of complexity throughout the year and as your organization continues to mature. You can't do everything at once in every exercise, so build that level up. You also want to be able to show different management and response proficiencies through this process. You want to test various elements to see where the strengths are, where are those real opportunities, and then where there are weaknesses and inadequacies. That way you come out of it with particular information. Now, as you're going through with this, you could consider deviating from the script to have some unplanned events. If you've got a person in your exercise that's dominating some of the responses, you can have an intervention to pull that person out. They could be hurt in an area, and so they are no longer able to contribute, or circumstances can be designed to do that. So as you put this together, you need to have that flexibility to recognize you want to adjust it as you go forward. And it's always important to make sure that anyone that participates in an exercise understands what the objectives and goals are. We're not here to penalize anyone. We're here to try to help them to learn. So making sure that the expectations are realistic is critical. We're not going to go build an entire hospital on this event. We're not going to be able to produce everything we have in the middle of a major event that's occurring. So understanding and making sure that the scenario is realistic. I doubt that Rochester is going to experience this tsunami. By the way, if you do, that means the rest of the country has been totally lost. So focusing on what's likely to happen in your area and what's a scenario that we should come together. You can consist of a generic strategy and a scenario, and then it would be typical of what would happen, obviously, where you are. Don't go for a great deal of complexity. Have a few events in each phase of the exercise, and then as you move to the next phase, you can give additional ones. You're compressing in an exercise a time period. It could be minutes, it could be hours, it could be days, but you're trying to do that and forcing decisions to be made at each step of that exercise. And you really want to address one or two key threats. I also recommend that you have some information built into your exercise that is extraneous, because in real life you don't have a sign coming up that says this is important, you better take action. So you want to have a few interventions that are there in the element that are not directly linked with what's occurring. We really want to look at the emergency response procedures, escalation and coordination and notification. You're going to find that communications failures are critical in every event. Again, the storm in Atlanta and the Southeast emphasized the failure in communication. I'm reminded of the movie that was out decades ago, proving how old and decrepit I am, Cool Hand Luke. And in that, the warden for the chain gang kept saying, what we have here is a failure to communicate. Every time that Paul Newman would do something that the warden didn't like. So what we have in most crises is a failure to communicate. We get the wrong message to the wrong people at the wrong time. And that needs to be integrated with every exercise that you do. You also want to look at alternative processing. How can we serve clients? How can we handle security as these events? Because loss of command and control is going to be a common element. And look at, as all of our business continuity plans are designed, how do we get back up and running? There are 5 types of exercises that we can do, and they generally are done in the order that we're going to go through them today. The first is an orientation or walkthrough. That's a simple getting your team together, have your plan there, step through the plan. The first time that your people see the plan doesn't need to be in the middle of a live event, a crisis or a disaster that's occurring. And so this type of a walkthrough of the plan and discussion, and then putting a couple of minor scenarios in front of them and saying, how would this work? Where in the plan would you look for that? Would be helpful to have that done. You can generally do those in an hour to an hour and a half, and it's a great beginning point or a refresher point each year to start to build that foundation. In talking about test exercises, the industry standard is at a minimum you need to do 1 a year. We generally feel that doing 3 to 4 a year is a much better best practice as you focus on it. Some organizations will do exercises every month or multiple exercises each month, not with the entire organization, but maybe with a department or a function. But starting with making sure that everyone is familiar, this orientation and walkthrough, showing how it would function in a scenario is a helpful beginning. When you move forward from that, and you probably are already doing this with a fire drill, you have a drill, a simulated event looking specifically at the emergency response, a shelter in place, an evacuation, a tornado, a fire drill. Those are the types of things that would come together. These tests could be much shorter, less than an hour. It could be as little as 10 minutes to see how long does it take us to evacuate, how long does it take us to hit a rally point and coordinate. And the big aspect of a drill that we would encourage you to think about are unannounced drills. We find that if every drill is announced, you will lose some effectiveness in that process. So having unannounced drills will certainly aid in that particular area. Types of exercises, the third, and this is the one that I think you're going to find that you'll do most of the time, is a tabletop. It's a simulated exercise or scenario with a series of escalating events where you're looking at procedures, coordination, who's making the decisions, who's doing the communications, planning those out as you go forward. These generally run an hour and a half to 2 hours, and if you add the debriefing time, the hot wash afterwards, it's another half an hour. So you should think about this as a half-day event, a 2.5-hour window that you're allotting, whether it's your incident response team or your crisis management team, or what we've done effectively, and I would encourage you to think about, put your incident response team in one room, put your crisis management team in another, and run a live event so that you can see the difference between the tactical steps and the strategic steps. We've also done it with both groups in the same room so that they would meet individually and report back to each other, giving you that escalation. And we'll show you today a couple of examples of some tabletop exercises. One other to think about is doing a very high-level version on an abbreviated schedule with your board because they've got an oversight responsibility here. And I'll share some thoughts there in a few minutes. Fourth is a functional exercise. It's limited involvement to do a field type of an exercise, more of a half-day event. Here you might want to have the fire or the police department involved or others that would be coming together. Here will be a good opportunity if you want to look at your key suppliers, have them involved in an exercise event with you to carry forward. By the way, supply chain failure is the most common failure in a disaster or crisis. So that's an area that's well worth your testing in this process to understand how you would go through those areas. And then lastly would be a full scale. Most of you will probably not do a full scale test within your organization where you're bringing in fire, police at the same time, coordinating it with other regulatory bodies and putting that cycle together. It can be as little as a 2-hour event or it lasts an entire day. But that really stresses the organization and can be a more significant disruption. I have seen this done effectively over a weekend, so it doesn't take away from the business operation during Monday through Friday as you would think of that area. One advantage is then you've got a full integration with the governmental authorities in the process as you're going. So think about these 5 types of exercises as we move forward. Now, what I would like to do is to talk a little bit about the follow-up. Afterwards, in that 30 minutes that's done, you want to do a review and evaluate what you've tested, whichever one of the 5 ways. What feedback can you give back to those that participated or those that didn't, because they will want to know. Review the key lessons that were learned from the test. What we find regularly when you're doing this, and we have a whiteboard, if you have in the room where you're running a tabletop, you can put those up where, oh, we forgot to tell these people. We don't know how to get in touch with our employees at home. What are those things that you will learn within the process that you'll want to use later then to do some updates? You want to particularly look at issues where command is lost, control is lost, there's been some coordination issues or communication areas, and you really want to get everyone in the room providing feedback. So what I would recommend is you're sitting around the table doing this hot wash, is go point your finger at one person and say, tell me one thing that went right in the exercise. Then go around the room. Anybody else have it after you've allowed them? Then come back and say, now tell me one thing that went wrong. And so you're getting that conversational input from each person individually, and you don't have a person dominating the entire conversation. If your structure is such, hold on one second here, that you've got departments and functions, you might want to have that organized around it. The analysis then you would write up, and it's always important to document this and share it back with management through the process. Did you meet the objectives? Did it test the information that you wanted it to? Do you have problems that you want to correct, and what actions are you taking? And where are the gaps that we need to integrate? Because we may have gaps not only within a single plan, but how that plan interfaces with the others. And as a result of the exercise, identify what you want to test again. Either is it a retest of this, or there are other areas now that we should think about as we focus forward. So I'm going to walk you through quickly some exercises, and when you we won't go all the way through any of them, but I wanted you to get a feel for the framework of these, and this should look familiar to those of you who are doing exercises on a regular basis. Here we're giving the exercise objectives, and I would have this as an actual slide at the beginning that you're showing to the participants. Here you want to validate and understand the monitoring process for the crisis. You want to identify the impacts on the business, the employees, the customers, management, the board, the public. You want to understand how we're going to communicate and what the content of that communication should look like. Determine what do we need to adjust either to respond or recover, and then where are the opportunities that we could improve our planning as we go forward. We also then would share with them what our assumptions are, and it should be based upon everyone's understanding. And the most important one is the last one on this page. There is no predetermined solution to this exercise. We don't want anybody to feel that they're at fault here. We're going to go through it and plan as we can. We give them goals to understand the roles and responsibilities, understand the importance of emergency, gain the insight, assess the overall effectiveness, and most importantly, use the plan. We did an exercise for an organization, and they were saying, well, we're going to do this. And I said, well, where in the plan does it tell you to do this? And they clearly identified they hadn't written it out, and they were making it up on the fly. There are going to be events that you're going to have to make up on the fly in a real crisis. But for those things that we can identify in advance, and we can document how you do it, and notice they use the word how. Most plans are focused on what to do and don't provide the clarity of how to do it. And one of the things that comes out of an exercise is the need for the expansion in your planning process to address the how. So in this hypothetical, we give a description of the company, the setting, the background, the facility. I've eliminated some of that so that you don't see some details from an actual presentation, but you can see the framework and the level that would be set up to make sure that everyone's on that at the beginning of the exercise. And then you have an update. And the update is a series of events or situations, and you see an escalation with phases. Now, in real life, we don't have anybody saying this is phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, like the rounds in a prize fight, but you see the escalations as they're occurring. You get a description of the event. In this situation, an alarm sound, origin uncertain, confusion, 911 call by multiple parties. There's an escalation. At 12:01, sprinklers are triggered. People are seen running. Reports vary on description, location, and severity. Security notified to dispatch to the building. 12:02, confusion continues. Activity is centered on the warehouse area. People are running and crying. Phone videos of confusion and panic shared. Bomb blast mentioned in text messages at 12:03. You move quickly to give the setting, and then you let the group say, what is it that they know? And if you're facilitating this, you would say, tell me one thing you know. Tell me one thing you know, so that you're getting multiple parties talking and going forward. What are you concerned about? What's your plan? What are you going to monitor? And what are you going to say? Then you have an update. You get an escalation. 12:04, 911 is called. Fire and police are dispatched. More reports of confusion, of explosion and injuries. Confusion. Notice to evacuate the building given. 12:05, screams heard. Security arrives. Debris and widespread damage. Injured seen by security. Paramedics dispatched. Lab isolated by security. There's chaos. So you want to focus on what's the delta, what's the change that's occurred. What is it you know? What are you concerned about? What's your plan as you go forward and looking at it? Now, we want to then keep the energy up in the discussion. If you break your group up into round tops, you can have them speak as subgroups if you have a large number. But if it's manageable enough, you can do this as an exercise with everyone contributing and going through. And this is going to focus people on what is it they know, not what they think. And that's a key differential as we go forward. And you, instead of asking the open questions, you could have asked very narrow questions. You'll notice here, instead of saying, what do you know and what do you think, are the employees trained? Did our emergency site plan include active shooters? Did we have control of access? Should we deactivate card readers? So this level of sophistication would be not the first exercise you run, but an enhancement down the road. So what we're showing is moving from the general to the specific is a goal by doing exercises over time. And the level of specificity starts to increase as we look at each of those areas. Now, there are other ways that we can do exercises and other objectives. So this is a completely different scenario from what we've talked about. And it would have started the same way with an introduction to those involved. But we could do this one geared more to the board level. And by the way, this is based on a real scenario that happened in a company. A furniture producer for home and hospitality industries had annual sales of $2 billion, 350 galleries and stores. The upholstery mix here used polyurethane foam. The foam has a large volume of storage space, so it intends to arrive just in time, and inventories are kept at a minimal level. And they have a different mix for each one of their products in their lines. Similarly, as we had an update, we have a key supplier of the foam identifies they can only provide half of what they normally do because of the shortage of TDI chemical component used within the area. All 4 of the nation's suppliers of that have been impacted by recent hurricanes. They had to declare force majeure, allowing them to restrict the terms of their contract, and they would be limiting the amount of TDI that they were supplying. The supplier also notified that they sustained damage as a result of a tornado. By the way, tornadoes are direct spin-offs of hurricanes on a regular basis, and it would have only a minimum inventory of the product. By the way, everything that I just described happened to a company. It's publicly traded, significant impact, and they had a furniture show coming up. So stepping the organization to look at that, and there's an example of how you would test supply chain and direct impact. At the end of it, we had told you to do a debrief. Here is sample debrief types of questions. Did it test our plan? Did it reveal any weaknesses? What tasks must we do to recover? And what are our top priorities associated with it? What are those 3 key? And I would ask everyone, what one thing would you do to change those outcomes? And then finally, what are the impacts? Now, Firestorm has a model of that is a maturity model that allows organizations to measure their performance in a crisis management situation. And that's a little bit more, and we can talk about that in another webinar as we continue on. But if you think about the webinar series or the exercises that you're doing, you want to test the predict area, the plan area, and the perform area in each one of the exercises that you would do with an organization. Under predict, had you identified all the vulnerabilities and threats? Had you identified their impact? Did you have effective monitoring in place? And did you have predetermined triggers to activate your plans? Again, in the ice storm that just came through the southeast, they didn't have effective monitoring. They didn't have effective triggers to know to activate their plans, and they didn't understand the impact that those vulnerabilities would have associated with it. So what we had was a significant failure in the predict section. Under the plan, you want to make sure that the plan told people how to do things, not just what to do, and that you had all of those things identified in predetermined messages that would go out under your communications portions, that you had management structure in place to be able to make the decisions to carry forward, and they should all be documented within the plan. And then finally, under plan, did you have the supplies you needed? Think about all those kids who slept in school overnight. Think about the fact that they didn't have food there, that they didn't have the proper materials to handle those types of events. Having an understanding of what supplies you need is critical. Then, had the plan never been tested? What defects did it generate? And then, is it a training issue that came out? Did your exercise test the training that was needed? Did it test the monitoring that was needed? And then finally, did it test the crisis management decision-making capabilities of your organization? So those 3 areas you'll see then you want to design in your exercise and as you would do it. And that's part of this series that we're doing together with the Rochester Business Alliance. If you'd like an assessment of your company's business continuity plan or your workplace violence plan or your social media risk program, let us know. Because of the underwriting of this webinar series by the Rochester Business Alliance, you can obtain that assessment and findings report at no cost to your organization. It's a $2,500 value, and that comes to you, again, because of the underwriting of this series by the Rochester Business Alliance. Go to the Firestorm website and ask to be contacted, and we'll try to reach out to everyone on today's broadcast. And by the way, today's broadcast is being recorded, and it would be available for replay by you or others within your organization, or if you know of some other business or organization that needs this information, please share the link with them so that they can view it. Our thanks to the Rochester Business Alliance for taking the time to underwrite this webinar series, and for Chip his help in facilitating and carrying out this program as we move forward in these areas. Chip, we covered a lot of information in a very short period of time. Did you want to make any observation about the testing of plans or what we're doing together?
You have, Jim, and it's been very helpful. I would tell you a couple of things we know from up here, from survey work that we've done. Most, let's say 75% of our members in the survey do an emergency plan, but then when you get into testing, it drops off pretty dramatically. And one of the issues we see is organizations running lean. There's a tendency to want to put both the planning and the testing into a very small group or an individual, rather than taking people away from their business. So that is an issue for us and something that we need to address. I'd also mention to you that we in Monroe County have had for decades an outstanding process of training between business and industry and the community emergency responders at our Emergency Operations Center that the county runs and at the training center, so that if some of our members would like to join in tests and drills with the rest of the community, that is certainly an option for them, so they don't have to run it all by themselves. But you're absolutely right on. This is critical to test and to test at the various levels that you've outlined. And thank you for doing that today.
Well, Chip, we appreciate the opportunity, and we look forward to working with the Rochester Business Alliance on future webinars and some workshops. This is part of our Crisis Coach program that we've been doing around the country and sharing with organizations. We all face these types of events. They can develop quickly. Identifying what's likely to impact can make a difference. For those of you watching today, if you'd like to watch this or some of the earlier webinars, you can go to firestorm.com/RBA, and they'll be listed there. You can also see future webinars as they're planned and register for those. We would encourage you, because we're all in this together, there's a mutual aid aspect around it. Please share this series with those in your community so that they can become better aware of what you're doing and what others need to be doing to accomplish that. So if you've got any questions, contact us at webinars@firestorm.com, or you can go to the firestorm.com website. We look forward to talking with you next month and covering another topic in this series. Thanks, Chip. Thanks, Bill, for the help today. We look forward to speaking with you again soon. We'll give everyone back their day, and enjoy the Super Bowl on Sunday. Goodbye.
Thank you, Jim. Goodbye.